Okay, we're very privileged and excited to have the principal developer with us today, the West LA Veterans Collective. Lady and gentlemen, thanks so much for coming and joining us, and we look forward to your comments.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good afternoon. On behalf of the West LA Veterans Collective, thank you very much for inviting us to present today. My name is Brian D'Andrea. I am Senior Vice President at Century Housing. During today's presentation, we'll have an opportunity to introduce our team, talk a little bit about our experience, and provide some initial thoughts on the opportunity before us. But for starters, make no mistake, we are in the midst of a crisis of epic proportions involving homelessness in our region, a crisis that affects our veterans more acutely than the general population. In LA County alone, as we know, more than 3,900 veterans experience homelessness on any given night. More than 3,900 of our heroes go without a home. That simply cannot be and needs to change. This includes veterans like Hank and Kathy. After moving to this country from the Netherlands, Hank enlisted in the Army. He was deployed to Vietnam, where he was injured on the front lines. After an honorable discharge, Hank became a master upholsterer and was later married to his sweetheart Kathy, to whom he's been happily married for 33 years. They have a son and a granddaughter. However, economic challenges led Hank and Kathy to become homeless. They remained on the streets for more than 3 years. A chance encounter with an outreach team from the fire department resulted in Hank and Kathy moving into a hotel, getting connected to services, and later moving into Anchor Place, Century's latest new affordable housing community at the Village at Cabrillo in Long Beach. Our West LA Veterans Collective represents a very natural and strategic alliance of organizations consisting of Century Housing, U.S. Vets, and Thomas SAFRAN and Associates. Today, you'll have an opportunity to learn a little more about each of us. But I'd like to stress that our partnership is not necessarily one of convenience, or one that's been hastily thrown together. At our heart, our partnership is a very natural and strategic alliance that has a long and storied history. For instance, Century and U.S. Vets goes back to the 1990s, when Century financed U.S. Vets Inglewood facility. Then in 1997, our two organizations worked together to create the Villages at Cabrillo, which is now home to more than 625 veterans. And interestingly, each of our organizations was founded by the late Ninth Circuit Judge Harry Pregerson, himself a World War II veteran. The Century Thomas SAFRAN and Associates connection relates back to more than 17 years. And over that time, Century's financed more than 14 of TSA's developments, helping produce more than 1,200 homes here in Southern California. And so together, our team features 3 organizations that are led by veterans, driven by mission, and deeply experienced in creating community. I think it's also worth noting that each of our organizations is headquartered right here in Los Angeles, well within the West LA VA's geography, including TSA, which is located less than a half-mile away. The bottom line is that we are rooted here locally, we are deeply accountable to our community, and we're very proud to say that this is our backyard. And so, at the end of the day, we are excited to be here, partnering with the VA to create a community on the North Campus in which our veterans can grow, heal, and thrive. If there ever was one, we very much see this as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. We feel incredibly privileged and honored to be here. We also feel the weight of the responsibility that's been entrusted to us. As mentioned, our team's efforts begin and end with our veterans. Ultimately, we are committed to the successful transition of our veterans and their families through the provision of service-enriched housing that promotes recovery, wellness, and a much more hopeful future. We're also committed to fulfilling the vision of the draft master plan and the promise of the original 1888 land conveyance. And so in partnership with the VA, VSOs, and other important stakeholders, we will work together to create an integrated, holistic community that comprehensively addresses the needs of our veterans. I'd like to introduce Century Housing. On behalf of our board and Ron Griffith, our president and CEO, who can't be here today, I'm very pleased to share a little bit about our organization. We're a nonprofit. We were established in 1995. However, our legacy goes back many decades earlier and is tied to the construction of the Century Freeway, the 105, running east-west here in Los Angeles. Century both develops and finances affordable housing throughout the state of California. Over our history, we financed more than 33,000 affordable homes and invested more than $1.5 billion of capital. Our housing development operation specializes in the provision of supportive housing, both the development and the management of supportive housing. We have deep experience in veteran housing as well as master planning. That's rooted largely in our 20 years history at the Villages at Cabrillo in West Long Beach, a 27-acre community that you'll hear about shortly. A community where we've comprehensively brought together partners and serving the diverse needs of more than 1,500 residents on any given night, including 625 veterans. As mentioned earlier, Century was founded by Judge Harry Pregerson, a World War II veteran, and today our president and CEO, Ron Griffith, is a decorated Army vet, having served in Vietnam and been awarded a Purple Heart.
Good afternoon. My name is Steve Peck. I'm the president and CEO of US Vets. I know some of you. This really represents a full circle for me. When US Vets was founded in 1993, I was working here at the VA in the outreach program, going out under the bridges and into the shelters to get veterans off the street. As Brian said, Judge Harry Pregerson came to the VA at that point and said there's a lot of homeless veterans out there. We are not housing them, and we need to do something. He found our initial building in Inglewood, our initial program, which was started in May of 1993, and that has been our learning lab over the years. Now that facility holds more than 600 formerly homeless veterans in a full continuum, going everywhere from bridge housing to permanent housing. We learned there that we have to provide the whole range of services, employment assistance, mental health, case management, therapeutic groups. We try to build therapeutic community, which I'll talk about a little later. But everything we have learned that we have used since 1993, we initially learned there. We have since grown to 11 sites across the country. We have 21 different housing buildings. We serve more than 3,300 veterans every night. And additionally, through the SSVF program, serve another 2,500. So we have experience with all manner of veterans, all shapes and sizes, individual veterans, families, seniors, women, and want to bring all that experience to bear when we mount our site here.
Thank you, Steve. Good afternoon. I'm Andrew Gross. I'm president of Thomas Safran Associates. Likewise, I know many of you, or some of you I should say, and it's really be a pleasure to meet the others in this room. As my predecessors here said, we could not be more thrilled and honored to be selected. I mean, it's truly, really a dream to be able to do really what's proposed here today, and it really is a great honor. A little bit about Thomas Safran Associates. We were founded over 45 years ago by Thomas Safran. Our chairman, Thomas Safran, is one of Brentwood's key stakeholders. We have our office, as was just said, less than a half mile from here. We're actually building a brand new office building. Some of you may see it on the corner of Montana and San Vicente. We are rooted here in Brentwood and this local community. I personally am on the board of New Directions, and so, you know, one of the keys here is our local roots, our history as well, and finally our experience in public-private partnership. You know, our goal is to really enhance the world in which we live and to enrich the lives of the people. The emphasis is on people who reside in our buildings, and as you hopefully will come to see at the VA, you will come to see at the VA, but you can see in our existing 60 units, 60 portfolio properties all over Los Angeles, that it really is the highest standard. You know, we believe, you know, in providing the highest standard of living conditions and enriching the lives of those people, because you have to. I mean, there's really no choice. There's no alternative to it. And so we really hold that bar incredibly high. So we look forward to continuing that on the VA.
Hi, my name is Lise BORNSTEIN. I'm with KFA Architecture. We are a Santa Monica-based firm, as Brian mentioned, that has been around over 40 years. We were right around the time that Thomas Safran's office was coming in to play, and we've made Los Angeles the focus and center of our firm. These are our neighborhoods. We've done over 16,000 residential units, both new and adaptive reuse. 4,000 of those are affordable housing for seniors, for special needs, families, formerly homeless, and veterans. We have a really talented group. I was about to say 72, but we have 73 people as of yesterday in our office. We've done many campuses throughout the area as well, including a live-work campus in Chatsworth, a transit-oriented campus in Culver City, and a campus for homeless, formerly homeless and veterans in the CD13 district. We pride ourselves in listening and engaging and delivering projects that incorporate community at the center of every building. I also have the pleasure of introducing our partner and collaborator in the master plan effort, which is City Fabric. City Fabric is doing similar planning efforts in San Pedro and Long Beach for affordable housing communities, and have done award-winning planning and urban design efforts related to transportation, open space, and housing. They've also worked closely with Long Beach veterans community to design and implement improvements to the Veteran Valor Memorial Plaza.
Thank you again, and just to emphasize really the key points we provided in our response to the request for proposal. We spent a lot of time thinking about what is important, and we are veteran-led. We're a veteran-led organization. As Brian mentioned, Century Housing, Steve PECK, these are veterans, and that is one of the most important things, as well as being veteran-minded. It was not lost on us when we read the RFP how important it is that everything comes back to veterans. Everything. Every decision we will make on this will come back to how do we best serve veterans. World class, that's our intention. We put together a team, and every project is to be best in class, world class. And what an opportunity we have here today with this campus. We see it as a model not only for Los Angeles, but for other VA campuses nationwide. We're locally rooted. We see that as a huge asset. Again, I've already mentioned it, but having a real stake in the surrounding community, I think that's to the benefit. We're mission driven. I've elaborated on that. And we say it in our credo. We really do. We say, don't judge me by anything, or any of us by anything we say here today. Measure us by what we do. Oh, and we have a bunch of letters of support that we provided from pretty much every level of government, and they're all in the RFP. I won't get into those today in the interest of time. Thanks.
We understood that doing this project was going to involve close interaction with VA, not only at the local level, but the national level. We have done a lot of that over the years. You can imagine, because U.S. Vets has the two largest sites in the country, right here in Los Angeles, and one of those being Villages de Cabrillo, which houses about 700 veterans, in addition to an additional 800 other homeless people. Most VA secretaries have been to our sites, HUD secretaries, and so we're keenly aware of the challenges around that. U.S. Vets has been working with the VA for 25 years since we started. The VA has this VA Medical Center has employees outplaced at our site, and we talk with them on a regular basis, not only about the issues in GPD, but in SSVF, in bridge housing. So it is an open conversation. It has to be, so that both of us are doing everything we can to serve those veterans in the best way that we can.
Just a bit on our financing experience. Together, our three organizations represent a highly capitalized partnership, strong balance sheets, healthy liquidity. These are all the necessary ingredients we need to bring together the capital needed to construct housing. Megan mentioned earlier the VA doesn't necessarily build housing with its own resources. That's what we do. We go out, we find the capital, whether it's federal, state, local. We bring together the resources to create the supportive housing. And that includes both public and private resources. Over the past 40 years, our teams have developed more than $1 billion worth of real estate here in Southern California. We are very much long-term owners and managers. We're very proud of the portfolios we've developed, and we greatly look forward to expanding our mutual portfolio here on the North Campus at West LA. We also have deep experience master planning that we will certainly bring to bear here on the North Campus. And building upon the planning work that's already been done as part of the draft master plan and many of the outreach and discussions that have funneled into that. Our goal ultimately is to create a better human experience, a better experience for our veterans by careful and thoughtful planning work. This afternoon, we are happy to share with you a couple of examples of our planning and development activity. I'm going to start with a little bit about our Villages at Cabrillo community in Long Beach that you've heard me mention a few times. As many of you may know, Long Beach used to be a Navy town. It was home to the shipyards. However, by the mid-90s, the federal government made the difficult decision to shutter those shipyards. And that was a decision that inflicted a great shock on the local economy in Long Beach. The Navy's property was ultimately divided up, and under the Federal McKinney Act, a piece of that property was decided to be set aside primarily to benefit the homeless. At the time, a concept was hatched to create a master planned, comprehensive, and therapeutic community on those 27 acres that would be set aside. The concept produced many naysayers, including the local papers, which commented that the conversion of the Savannah Cabrillo Navy housing complex would be neither logical nor desirable. Ultimately, under a competitive process, the property would be conveyed to Century in 1997. And now, more than 20 years later, and after 5 distinct phases of development representing more than $170 million worth of investment, and after bringing together a consortium of more than 30 different organizations, both private and public, we are proud to say, and looking back, that we're proud about what's been accomplished, and we are very grateful to those big thinkers from the early days. We've come a long way over the years at the Villages. What started as a couple of programs and a handful of old buildings has expanded into a comprehensive housing continuum that provides shelter to more than 1,500 residents on any given night, including more than 625 veterans. And while our organization plays an important role at the Villages, really the secret sauce as to what's been created is all of those collaborative partners, the more than 30 partners that come together day in and day out to provide the necessary services to our residents and our veterans. These include organizations that provide health care, mental health, case management, including partnerships with universities that bring occupational therapy and social work students that create groups for our residents, career and educational resources. All of these services have been brought to bear for the direct benefit of our residents. Our partners include U.S. Vets, who we started with 20 years ago, and the VA itself. We work very closely with the Long Beach VA. It operates a CBOC, a community-based outpatient clinic within the heart of our community. The VA also operates a recovery center, a recovery clinic for veterans. We've learned a lot at the Villages over those 20 years, as you can imagine. These are lessons and experiences that we will bring to bear here in West LA. We acknowledge full well that the conditions and the environment here is a little bit different than where we operate in Long Beach. There are clearly differences. However, there are elements of what we've created that we think are applicable to what we would like to do on the North Campus, which is to create this bustling and thriving community that serves the needs of our vets. We think a lot about what we call the 4 C's of success: commitment, coordination, control, and concentration. And these 4 factors have been at the heart of our successes. Later today, you'll receive a copy of our impact report, and you'll see what some of those successes look like. Those successes very much involve the public sector. It's not just us in the private sector doing this. It involves close collaboration with the City of Long Beach, the Housing Authority, the VA, the Health and Human Services Department in Long Beach. We're not in Long Beach here, we're in Los Angeles. We have very established relationships with the necessary departments in the city of LA and the county of LA here, and we will bring the same model to the North Campus. We've learned about the importance of creating a backbone organization. That's a concept born out of a philosophy called collective impact. And that's the organization that can hold a large-scale initiative together, that can coordinate activities, that can communicate effectively, letting everyone know what's happening, communicating successes. The stability afforded by a backbone allows partners to focus on what they do best, which is serving the residents and veterans that they are there to serve. We've also come to appreciate the tension between urgency and patience. There's an absolute urgency to our work. No veteran should go without a dignified home. We also know from experience that a long-term view of the world is helpful and even necessary. Communities don't materialize overnight. They're wrought of hard work, persistence, missteps, and learning. But in the end, all of these efforts can have tremendous successes, and in Long Beach, our residents are increasing their incomes, remaining in their housing, and we're moving the needle in terms of reducing the incidence of veteran homelessness.
Each site that we've started from the ground up. We understand the size of this. If you think of 1,200 units of housing, you sometimes wonder where you start. We start with the building number 1 and veteran number 1. And we've done this 11 different times. As I said, Inglewood has been our learning lab. For 7 years, it was our only site. We started the very first month with veteran town halls, inviting first the 25 veterans who were there and then the 100 veterans who were there to talk to us once a month to see how we were doing, to see what we could be doing better, what their needs were. So we always use the veterans as our source of information. As time has gone on, programs have changed, funding streams have changed, the demographics of veterans have changed. So our program has changed somewhat. We used to be a sober facility. Housing First movement came along. We understood that we have to get some veterans off the street and work with them. We do that now. We have bridge housing there now for veterans who have a VASH voucher, don't know where to go. They're still homeless, can't get into an apartment. So we have about 20 of those beds. So we've really adjusted with the times. We continue to expand our sources of income, knowing that income streams change over the years. But at the bottom of it, we know that we have to provide this comprehensive range of services, from case management to mental health counseling to employment assistance, the therapeutic groups that we create, and the therapeutic community that I'll talk about a little bit later that we will create here. All of those things combine to create a healthy and safe environment where veterans are free to experiment, to change, to bring themselves out of their old habits into new habits that will make them healthy and independent, and hopefully they will rejoin the community, rejoin their families, and become productive citizens again.
Gross again with Thomas SAFRAN Associates. So we're excited to provide a few examples. Again, we have over 60 units of, I said that twice now, 60 developments of housing. When I joined, we had 17. We now have over 60 all over Southern California. One thing I didn't mention before is we manage only our own buildings. So the quality I mentioned before, we keep ideally into perpetuity. This was one we selected for the RFP. We really selected it because of the complexity of it. It's called Macadam Campus. It's actually in partnership with the LGBT Center of Greater Los Angeles. It's over by Highland and Santa Monica. It's a large collaboration to provide 25 units of transition age youth housing with the HHH funds that are in the city of Los Angeles. It has 98 units of senior housing. It also has 50,000 square feet of really office and community space for the LGBT Center to provide services. And so we thought it was a good example of putting together all these different types of uses into one development. And we are happy to say we have actually now started construction. So that's one example. The next example is with partnership of New Directions. We really an incredible community in Glendale. It's called Veterans Village of Glendale, and it's they're providing affordable housing, 45 units to veterans. And you know, again, it was from 30 to 60% of area median income. That's the affordability and the quality. You can see in the pictures, hopefully, but it's nothing like going there. Is really at a high level. All right, enough about who we are. You've heard who we are. We're really going to talk about next about what our vision is for the VA campus.
I get this fun slide. My name is Lise BORNSTEIN again. I'm from KFA Architecture. We picked a few of our WEC statements. These are our vision statements for what we envision for the West LA VA. We see a community that serves a spectrum of needs with a priority to advance the health and well-being of our most vulnerable veterans. We see a community that provides high-quality homes with necessary amenities and services assembled holistically for our veterans' health and growth. We see a community that honors the legacy of the original land grant and America's collective support of our military veterans. Embedded within this vision is a broader goal to bring together neighborhoods both within and outside of the campus to form communities and social networks that lead to a healthy and vibrant lives. To do that, we will look at connections within the campus to find ways to allow for a diversity of mobility throughout the site, not only to accommodate cars, but to also include paths, sidewalks, and small, intimate streets so people can enjoy sunny afternoon walks with friends and family. A bike network to encourage other means of transit, places where you can catch a bus or even walk to the Purple Line. We will look to create open spaces with a variety of landscapes that lead you through and connect the site, places to enjoy large gatherings on a green, or smaller, more intimate spaces for quiet and peace. And a built environment where residents can have their own home, their own space, but can also find spaces to socialize, get business training, or you share a meal with a neighbor. Our guiding principles create a roadmap for our master plan work. Home, creating home for our residents, building neighborhoods, creating support for mental and physical health, creating opportunities throughout the site, restoring and respecting the historic fabric of the site, and creating a sustainable approach and promoting sustainable ideas. And finally, our urban design strategies dive deeper and allow us to further develop and create a finer grain and texture to the master plan site. We imagine closing our eyes and creating a new vision and future for the site. Thank you.
Thank you, Lise. This is Brian DeAndre again. So after our selection in early November, we've literally hit the ground running. Been very busy, working closely with the VA team, both here at GLA and the DC team, getting up to speed. Naturally, all of our development activity can't proceed until the VA satisfies its NEPA requirements. And as you know, we're presently in the midst of the public comment period associated with the draft PIS. Our team understands that partnerships are challenging, that their success is often hinges on both trust and clarity. And that's why it's so important that our team, along with that of our consultants, has a long history of working together in an established bond of trust. In our work, we also understand the importance of outreach and engagement with key stakeholders. As Andrew mentioned earlier, as part of our proposal process, we garnered more than 20 support letters from important stakeholder organizations, elected officials, VSOs. That same spirit of outreach is going to infuse our planning and development activity and operational work here ultimately at the West LA VA. A successful community absolutely has to enjoy the input and participation of a diversity of stakeholder voices, including the most important voice, that of our veterans. And as part of our ordinary business practices, we regularly incorporate and exceed local participation and hiring requirements. We customarily work with GCs that have a successful track record of meeting these targets. In our principal developer role, we've identified a series of veteran-focused hiring targets and contracting goals that we plan to achieve, including contracting goals to VOSBs and SDVOSBs, apprenticeship, and hiring programs. To hold ourselves accountable, we'll bring in a third-party compliance monitoring firm. A recent example of our work on this front is our Beacon Place project in Long Beach, where our hiring goal, or contracting goal, was 5% of contract value to disabled veteran business enterprises, and we're proud to report that we're now at 9% of construction value.
We've spoken with the VA and through our experience across the country, we know that the demographics of the homeless population are changing, and we'll be focusing on serving the population in particular that's here in Los Angeles, those 3,900 that Brian talked about before. We know that they're an aging population, so this building, 207, our first building, will be focused on senior veterans. We know that there is a lot of chronic homelessness, so that we're going to particularly reach out to them, cooperating with the COE, with the COC, with this ES system, to identify those most vulnerable veterans, to bring them in, and that the household composition is 94% are individuals. So we will then tailor the housing that we create to the population. So most of them will be for individuals, studios, and one bedrooms, and then some housing for families as well. Next. I talked a little bit about our Inglewood site, and we approach our provision of services about the same at every site, adjusting according to the population that we're serving. We know that we have to provide comprehensive services. We don't want veterans to have to go somewhere else to access services. So when those services are readily available, they are more likely to avail themselves of those services. At each site, we create a therapeutic community, and we do that, as I said, by talking a lot with those veterans. We form a veteran council to get them to take some responsibility for their own rehabilitation. We do regular town hall meetings to listen to them, to see what their needs are, what their complaints are. We really want to be in touch with the veterans that we're serving. We collaborate with anyone who will help us serve veterans. Obviously, the VA is our largest collaborator, but with HUD, with city, with county, with other nonprofit organizations that can help us provide the full range of services that we need. We don't have to do everything. We know that we can't do everything, so we welcome the services from other agencies. And at this site, we'll create the backbone organization that will help keep all this together. We know that there are other services on site now. We know that other service providers will come in as we expand this housing and build this housing. So the backbone organization will act essentially as an executive committee. All of the leaders of those organizations and the VA will come together on a regular basis to talk about how we're all doing. We did this down at Villages at Cabrillo when we first started back in 2000. Brought all the executive directors together, discussed our policies and procedures so we'd all have a common understanding of what it is we were trying to accomplish with the veterans that we were serving.
Thank you, Steve. My name is Tyler Monroe. I'm the Vice President of Development for Thomas SAFRAN Associates. I'm given the privilege of giving you a brief update on where we are, what our concepts are for Building 207. Our plan for Building 207 is to do an adaptive reuse of the existing building, at least 50 units of supportive housing for formerly homeless or currently homeless senior veterans, as Steve mentioned. One of the single largest growing populations in the homeless population, and also within the senior veteran population, is the senior component of that population. Next slide. So that's the emphasis of the population we're currently thinking about serving for 207. Here's kind of an overview of the organization, the collective. Thomas SAFRAN Associates is the lead. Also with in-house property management company that Thomas SAFRAN Associates has to ensure the quality long-term of the project. And then we have a great team of consultants as well engaged to, number one, ensure the historic integrity of the project is maintained in the building, and that we're able to efficiently deliver the housing in an effective way. Next slide, please. Again, just briefly mention the target population being 100% permanent supportive housing for senior veterans ages 62 and over is what is currently being discussed. And here's just a brief timeline. We were selected at the end of last year. We're currently gearing up to apply for first funding applications, City of Los Angeles, Triple H, project-based VASH vouchers, beauty VASH vouchers in first quarter of this year, and then applying to the state of California for allocation of tax-exempt bond financing and low-income housing tax credits at the end of the second or beginning of the third quarter, all with the idea of closing our financing and beginning construction at the end of this year. And this is all aimed towards having our veterans in their homes by into the second quarter of 2021. As I mentioned, Thomas Safran Associates and my colleagues mentioned before, we have an in-house property management company that is critical to who we are and that enables us to maintain and ensure the top quality of the communities that we develop. It's not enough just to build a project and turn it over. It's of paramount importance to ensure that once a project is complete and operating, that it is maintained at the highest standard. So when you see it 20, 30, 40 years down the road, it is of the same standard, if not better than when it opened. That's how you create community. That's how you ensure that it stays vibrant and you have an amazing place for our veterans to live. I think that's it for me.
So I've talked quite a lot about our supportive services and the supportive services that we will provide here. We want to make sure, as I said, that those veterans feel safe, that they feel they're in a place where they can take chances and move forward. We want them to reconnect with their families. We do regular events, obviously Veterans Day, July 4th, but also Thanksgiving, Christmas, really to make it a home environment. We welcome their families in. We really encourage them to reconnect with their families. Some of the veterans that we treat have not seen family in 20 years because of their substance abuse or their homelessness. And so we really encourage them to make those connections again. This is much more about veterans than it is about building buildings. We are very intent on creating a place where veterans will feel safe and feel at home. And for me and for our organization, this was born out of my experience in the Marine Corps, where we learned to take care of each other. And we take this ethos to heart at US Vets. I encourage all of our outreach workers, for instance, to go out and get every guy that they can find, bring them in, whether they think they're eligible or not. We always want to err on the side of compassion and serving those individual veterans one by one, day by day, is really at the core of what we do. This is Malcolm. I got to know him a few years ago. Met him at our Long Beach site. Malcolm came out of a pretty rough neighborhood, joined the Navy to get out of that neighborhood, and intended to make the Navy a career. He was in about 10 years, but was involved in a tragic accident, an explosion that killed his best friend in front of him. And that sent Malcolm into a spiral of drinking and drugging. He couldn't pull himself out of it. Ultimately, the Navy let him go. They did not re-up him. He went back to his community, completed 2 years of college. He's a smart guy, but the drinking and behaviors brought him down again. He ultimately ended up homeless. Was homeless 10 years. And 3 years ago, we met him at a park in Long Beach. Our outreach worker began talking to him. Had to talk to him for more than a year to get him to come in. Malcolm was in a place where he couldn't trust anybody. He would not put his life in anyone else's hands. He was only listening to himself, which is where many people end up. Finally, Pedro, our outreach worker, convinced him to come in, came into our Long Beach site, and was immediately, they began to give him responsibilities. So to build up his self-worth, that gave him things that he could do, that he could accomplish. Found out that he had a disability payment available to him. He had the GI Bill available to him. He went back to college, completed his undergraduate degree, and then joined the social work school in Long Beach. He now is in his second year of social work school with a 3.9 average. He's working for us on the weekends. We're helping him to give him some work experience, and he's going to make one heck of a social worker. And this is what it's all about.
Thank you. Thank you.
There he goes. Questions? Here we go. Surprise.
Shocking. Anthony Allman. I'm not sure who would be the best person to answer the question. Maybe Brian. I know we've talked in the past, but first of all, it's a great presentation. Thank you very much. So, in terms of the project timeline, when do you think the collective will have a total grasp over the infrastructure needs for the campus?
So, as you know, Anthony, we are, Brian DeAndrea, for those of you that are not here in the room, we're in the midst of this public comment period associated with the EIS, so we're not actually able to proceed with any development activity. We are very much in assessment mode.
Right.
We are onboarding ourselves, where we've been downloaded a lot of information. We've got a civil engineer and a dry utility consultant on board that is, and both of those groups are beginning their assessment work. We're also beginning our, what we might call our neighborhood planning work to assess the buildings that are on the North Campus, identify those that we think are suitable for redevelopment, identify those that may not be, identifying new construction areas. These are all things that have been explored and studied as part of prior planning processes, including the draft master plan. So I guess what I would say is that that process is underway and will become clearer. I think we'll have a better idea in the, say, 6 months ahead of us as to what the ultimate infrastructure needs are of the future community.
6 months from now, the end of the final record of decision for the PEIS.
Well, I mean, we're eager to hear comments that will flow out of the PEIS process. We are undertaking assessment activities right now, so I mean, I think that ultimately is going to be informed by the draft PEIS process. So I think by the end of this year, by later this year, we'll have a much better idea of what the ultimate needs are. Of course, that's subject to change based on financing, based on the actual environmental process.
Hello. Well,
Half press on the left from the red to green.
hi, Dan Rosenfeld. Speaking for the record, I'm familiar with all four of the firms that are represented here, and I think we're very fortunate to have a team of this caliber working on this assignment. So, welcome. As I understand, as a new member, the role of this committee is to help you be successful. We're not the Inquisition. We're not here to find fault. We're here to find ways to help you accomplish the objectives that you stated very well in this presentation. So my question is, to the extent you can, and as candidly as you can today, what do you see as the greatest challenges that you face with this engagement? And then secondly, what can this board do to help you?
Maybe I'll start, Brian DeAndrea again, and then I'll turn it over to my colleagues here. I mean, one basic challenge is the sheer vastness of the real estate. We have 388 acres. Naturally, not all 388 acres are north of Wilshire Boulevard, but there's a tremendous amount of opportunity before us in figuring out how to plan sensibly to create a cohesive community, and a community that has enough center of gravity to produce the vibrancy that we're looking for, I think is one of the challenges that we're facing right now. Also, clearly there are many voices, there are lots of ideas and opinions. We are being, on a daily basis, hit up with people and organizations that have ideas on how to proceed. And so the sheer volume of of I think ideas and organizations that, you know, and many of which have a vested interest in seeing this thing be successful. So being able to aggregate all that, sort out what makes sense, what may not make sense, and be able to kind of communicate back to the stakeholder community as to our progress, I think, you know, that itself is a challenge.
Can I ask a follow-up? Okay.
Follow-up, go ahead.
A quick follow-up question. I mean, one of the questions that many people will have is about financing. And I know it's very early in the project, but we also know that the revenue side of your business model is very limited in terms of ability of your tenants to pay rent, if you will. What can you share with us in terms of your plan for financing these major projects? And you know, do you have a sense of how you're going to be able to raise the capital to build them, and then the operating funds to provide the services?
Yeah, when the question came up with challenges, that was my first answer, is resources, both in human capital, but also in dollars and cents, right? So that's a huge challenge for us going forward. Fortunately, on the housing side specifically, you know, that's what we do. You know, we cobble together money and put together communities to make them feasible. And so on the housing side, there are funds from the City of Los Angeles, there are funds from the County of Los Angeles, there are funds from the State of California, and there's funds from the federal government. Now these ebb and flow. Like for instance, we mentioned HHH. Well, we just heard that HHH is going to be fully subscribed by the end of this year. So, you know, they constantly ebb and flow, and our job is to identify and apply for these funds to make these projects feasible. You know, that said, it's the other things, right? Services are the same thing too, by the way. There is money for services currently, especially for the homeless population. So there are funds for that, and that's what we would do, is go about applying for those funds. It's the other things. You mentioned infrastructure. Infrastructure is a great question. When are we going to know about infrastructure? It's a great question. I mean, our job right now is to put together a proposed master plan. We saw the draft that was done, and so now the question is, how are we going to change that or amend that, and we'll surely present that to you. But what's it going to look like? You know, we love the idea, and Megan was mentioned it too. It's neighborhoods, right? This needs to be its own neighborhood. And so how do we do that? It's going to require infrastructure. And how do we fund that? You know, that is to be seen. We have some ideas, but that could be a great place to partner with you all. If there are great ideas, even if they're bad ideas, we'd love to hear them, frankly, because we'll evaluate all options. So prefer the good ideas.
To give you one example of how we've been creative with accessing financing for infrastructure at the villages, the bus stop previously was outside the perimeter of our community. We wanted to figure out how to move it into the heart of the campus. And by the way, when the Navy deeded the property, they gave us everything: streets, sidewalks, storm drains, sewer. We had to figure out how to maintain all of that. But we were able to access state cap and trade capital through the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities program to upgrade all of the infrastructure: street, storm drain, sidewalks, bicycle infrastructure, and we moved the bus terminal from outside our community into the heart of the community. So there are ways we can get creative with the capital sources that are out there to fund some of this. It's going to require a lot of creativity though, because there is a lot of need here.
Donna Deutschman, for the record. I also know most of you. And I've also had the pleasure of touring the property down in Long Beach. Just one side note on the last question. I assume also this will be a large tax credit project, and that'll be a source of a good number of funds for the construction. Is that accurate?
That's right. That's correct.
Yes, okay. So those we don't expect to dry up anytime in the future. That already was considered and voted against, so we're in good shape there. In terms of the population and the target group, I absolutely agree, and we all know Steve's expertise in this area. My question, though, has to do with the mandate and the numbers of single parents, which we see every day coming in, who are homeless. And choosing to unfortunately remain homeless rather than separate from their children. Women and men in the current conflicts. We see a lot of single fathers. And I'm wondering, I know that this is a massive project, but are there going to be family units entertained for those who are situationally homeless with families, small families?
Absolutely. We've talked about that. We have Women with Children program down in Long Beach. But we're keenly aware that there are men out there with children, single men with children. So within that family area, there will definitely be space for both single fathers, single mothers, full families, older couples. I mean, we really want to, as we go on, this will roll out over a number of years. So the senior project is simply the first of many, and we'll continually evaluate what the need is and incorporate those other populations that maybe previously haven't been served into the construction. Now, the services are a different question. We are, US Vets is continually in Sacramento, in Washington, D.C., talking about these various populations for which there is no funding. So we are continuing to expand, our advocacy for veterans in populations that have not heretofore been served, and expanding the availability of funding through the state, through the county. This is a very high-profile project. We've talked to the county a couple times. They said they're in. We're going to keep them to it. But we know that this is going to be a challenge, but I think this team is really up to that challenge.
Excuse my denseness, and I apologize, but the buildings that we're entertaining in the plan that we saw today, are they all seniors or are they families as well?
That's just building number one.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right,
So that
thank
each
you.
building will have additional populations.
So the ones in your RFP will include families?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, and for the record, I'm Rob Eglin. I'm going to cover some ground that I think is probably familiar to you, but by doing it, it'll make for a formal request or ask. And that is the Chip-In Act. We are in the fortunate position of being able to make recommendations to the Secretary of the VA in response to a congressional statute that says up to 5 campuses around the country can be designated to receive essentially charitable gifting towards major construction. And so one of the things that we're, as a committee, going to discuss is what our form of our recommendation would be on that. So I'm sure we'll be advised by the VA's lawyers and other people as to how exactly we have to frame that request in order to comply with Congress's language. What I would like all of you to start thinking about and come back to us with is what would be your top 5 or top 10 list. I don't know if we could characterize infrastructure, for example, as a major construction project. We could debate that with the lawyers. But town centers or other types of things like that that don't fit neatly within the model of just supportive housing. Everything else that we might be able to argue should be treated as eligible for those funds. I know I'd love to get your perspective on, because it's you who are being left trying to figure out how to make the master plan work as a community. It's great feedback. Thank you. Yes, the end of the question.
So this is Megan Plans. Just I suspect we've caught our team here off guard, who may not be as up to speed on the Chip-In Act as they would need to be in order to respond substantively to that. We will have a briefing tomorrow that will help everybody in the room, including the principal developer team, if they care to join us, to understand what the Chip-In Act allows for and what it might be appropriate for and not. So I just want to make sure that we're not, that you all know that you shouldn't, this isn't a quiz on an area we haven't taught you about yet. It's just not yet.
Happy to learn about it.
Other questions? Oops, I'm sorry. Oh, you did. Okay.
I can just make a couple of comments.
Yes.
Philip Mangano for the record. I just want to commend first of all, it's an excellent presentation, but also commend you. In our own discussions here, there was a grave concern about the issuing of the RFP or the RFQ, and there was some debate about which it would be. And the fact that it would be essentially bare-boned, that we wouldn't get the concept of community, and that a developer would come in without those kinds of sensitivities. And I think in the discussion today, in your presentation today, you've certainly indicated that the way in which the VA acted actually did produce what was hoped for here at this table, that there would be a larger sense of community, not just the establishment of housing, but the establishment of all of the amenities that go with housing. So I commend you on that. I know funding is obviously an important ingredient in actually creating that. I also commend you on the attention and the priority to seniors. I know that there are some studies locally here, but I think it's either this week or next week, Dr. Dennis Culhane at the University of Pennsylvania, who's been looking at the aging of the homeless population, including the aging of homeless veterans. He's making a presentation at the conclusion of his research, which will be focused on the costs that will be associated with homeless people and homeless veterans if we don't provide housing for them. And of course, those costs will be much greater than the cost of those folk being in housing. So to the degree that you're focused initially, as I understand it, on seniors, and your seniors are very much a part of the strategy that you're rolling out, I think that will serve you well in the near future. Dr. Culhane is making a presentation to a number of federal agencies. I guess some of them won't be there by virtue of, I guess VA will be there by virtue of their budget being appropriated. So that focus on seniors, that will serve you very well in terms of potential resources in the near future. So all in all, I commend you both on the larger vision of community and then a focus on seniors themselves.
Please pass it on.
And I think we have an opportunity here. This, as we've said a couple of times, this is a unique opportunity. We are on the VA campus. We are bringing multiple outside resources to the VA campus, but the degree to which we can engage the VA as well in those services on North Campus, I think will really go a long way toward providing some of the gaps that may be present in the services that we provide.
Just as a follow-up, as you may know, one of the considerations of this group is to make recommendations to the Secretary specifically with regard to services. And in an earlier conversation with Ann, who is the director of the medical center, we talked about the services that are already here on the campus. We've been doing some research on what services are necessary for veterans. We're looking to 1,200 additional veterans being on the campus. So we understand that there both might be services that are not currently available that are needed, but probably more importantly, the scaling of services that are here, but are disproportionate to the size of the homeless population that will be living here. So to the degree that you all have been thinking about the services, and of course, Steve, through your program, implementing services in a variety of different places, your input to the services attention that we're paying, that would be invaluable in terms of the recommendations we intend to make directly to the Secretary. So we'd certainly appreciate your input in that regard.
Absolutely. And as we develop our plan with more specificity, we certainly want to bring in all of those services that are present. We know that New Directions is here. That could really be a pipeline to some of the housing here. We know that there's a whole variety of other services, and Megan and Ann are going to introduce us to those folks, and hopefully we'll bring them into that backbone organization that we talked about, so that we really are most efficiently using all the services that are available. There's no point in our raising money for services that are already being provided by somebody else.
Right. I think our concern is to be informed of what you deem to be either not available or that needs to be dramatically scaled up, because that would be the nature of a recommendation to the secretary.
Absolutely, we will, yeah, as we continue our planning, we'll bring you up to speed on that.
Hi, Art Dela Cruz. Just a quick question for you. One of the things we concentrated on when we took a look at the RFQ pre-release and we made recommendations to the IPT is one of the things we were really worried about, some of us on the FACO, is that we'd end up with a balkanized result in that the scope of it, which specifically stated building 207, some principal developer responsibilities. What is the strategy, with an understanding that the vision is there, as Philip talked about, what kind of things can we do to help you to stitch this together? Because my sense is it gets us to a certain point, but we run a risk of, having building 209, MacArthur Field, 207, and not being able to build in between and finish out the project. What kind of things do the people around this room and probably in the public do to make sure that happens? Because is another solicitation going to come out in Fed Biz Ops, which is going to say this is how we're going to fill in the holes, or what's your approach to doing that and making sure in a 380 plus acre campus that we're doing it the right way collectively?
Brian DeAndre here. Thank you for that question. As we understand our selection, we've been tasked with serving as the principal developer for the entirety of the North Campus. That touches buildings that have been already awarded to other EUL holders, including Blue Green, Step Up on Second, core companies. We are already coordinating with those organizations. We've met with them once. We're going to be meeting again. We've actually had a number of phone conversations. For us to build this holistic community, we've got to have them at the table and bought into this concept. And so to the extent the RFP was written in that manner, the RFQ was written in that manner, basically entrusting us with the responsibility for orchestrating the entirety of the North Campus, I think that has given us essentially the charge of the commission to work collaboratively and productively with those third parties. I think in your seats around the table here, we are open to your ideas and feedback. So please keep those thoughts circulating to us. We're in very much data gathering mode right now and listening to ideas, and there are no bad ideas at this juncture. It's a tall task, but we feel confident that amongst our partners here, with the support of the local VA, the VA in DC, that we will be able to undertake this important task of creating community, creating neighborhood on the North Campus. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah.
It's off.
Oh, it's not working?
Yeah.
Jeff Shear for the record. Hi, thank you. You guys did an excellent job to start. A couple quick questions. First, the presentation, and I think most of the documentation out there as well, really focuses on homeless veterans being the priority and the preference in services and housing in the future state. But I also want to keep an eyeball on the broader Los Angeles veteran community as well. And so just, do you guys have any initial thoughts around those kind of, the needs of the broader Los Angeles community veterans and the services that will potentially be provided in the future state? And if not, that can come in the future as well. Obviously, it's a evolving program.
It does say homeless and at-risk veterans in the language, and we, US Vets, has also created homeless prevention programs. So we hope that this site will not only serve those who are residents here at the site, it'll act as essentially as a West Side service center to provide services for other veterans who are not yet homeless, and potentially we can provide them the services that will prevent them from becoming homeless.
I guess my question is even broader than that, more of going back to the Johnson Thing vision document, so the veteran entrepreneurial ecosystem and the maker spaces, and I could see potentially in a future state the Small Business Administration having, resource centers for veteran entrepreneurs on the campus, and any other number of services as well. So just asking that as you guys charter out on your mission to keep an eyeball on the broader Los Angeles ecosystem, that beyond just the immediate priority.
Yeah, we've looked at City Fabric and KFA have presented us with a range of options for amenities, not residential buildings, which would include theaters and workshops and auto repair and yoga, and I mean, you name it. And bringing in something like that, I think is absolutely possible.
Letitia Colchado for the record. I guess kind of piggybacking on Donna's comment earlier about veterans that have families or single parents. Aside from housing for families in terms of the development of the land, is there any consideration being given to playground space or childcare kind of facilities so that even as veterans that are coming here for appointments may be able to, bring their family with them and this be a destination where it would be good for families?
Yeah, thank you. Those are basic amenities that any community has, and we envision this community to be just like any community, having space for recreation, whether it's playgrounds to the extent we're serving veteran families, green space, gathering spaces, both exterior and interior spaces like a social hall where there can be gatherings and other types of workshops and things of that nature. So we very much appreciate the comment. Yes, this community will be replete with amenities. And the good news is there's the real estate for it and the existing buildings, right? There are many buildings on the North Campus that are underutilized and vacant that have great potential to be repurposed and put back into productive use in service to our veterans.
This is a question, and I'm not sure if it's for our principal developers or our chair. This is Donna Deutschman for the record. Thank you. It occurs to me that you're very brave for responding to this RFP or RFQ. What you said about the fact that you're the principal developer and there have already been some developers selected for the other buildings, which is true, and that you have a responsibility to make a cohesive quilt out of these pieces. Do you have the responsibility without any authority? Yeah, I know that's a very direct question, but it's tended to be because I'm wondering if the chair feels there's any recommendations as a committee we can make that might help you with that, if that's the case.
The good news is the organizations that are already developing here are from Los Angeles, from California. We know them.
Okay.
We've already met with them. So while we do not have direct authority over them, we're hoping we have to some degree some moral authority given our experience and track record to bring them along and show them what can be and why it makes sense to participate in a larger community. I think we can provide a very compelling proposition to them as to sharing of resources and coordinating services so as to avoid duplication. So I don't believe necessarily at this juncture any statutory requirements to participate exist. Perhaps that's a possibility down the road. But I think to some degree we'll see how our ensuing conversations and work with our partners, and we consider them partners. We're here to, we're all of us are here for the long term, right? These EUL leases are for 75 years. So we're optimistic. We look forward to it, and we have no reason to believe that it can't happen.
There's also the cohesiveness of the off-site development, though, and the streets and walkways and et cetera. Are they compelled or just willing to work with you on those?
So I think 205, 208, 209 are a little bit different. Those are existing buildings, right? With MacArthur Field, Building 207, and everything else. As part of the programmatic agreement, which is one of the elements of the PEIS document, the VA will be working to create a set of campus design guidelines. It's called a Campus Historic Resource Plan. And that document, we will all have a voice in and be able to inform, but that will provide for some level of uniformity and consistency to ensure what is developed actually fits within the fabric and character of our community, so we don't end up with a hodgepodge of spaces and buildings that don't integrate. So I think we're on the right track on this note.
In the highest tradition of shuffling off to Buffalo and ask a question, I was going to pass this to Megan. Unfortunately, Mr. McPherson is here from the VA staff, the Office of Asset Management, and he's got comments.
Thank you. My name is Paul McPherson, and to answer your question, my job as director of the Enhanced Use Program is to knit the fabric together for the developers that are already on the campus with the principal developer. And so it's our charge in VA corporately to make sure that everyone that's on the north part of the campus that's working on housing works together. We charge the principal developer with creating, you might say, a homeowners association to deal with common area maintenance and those other items, community space. And so I'm not sure that the committee could add to that because that's already the charge that we've tasked the community developer, and we've also got the buy-in from the current developers to participate in that process.
Thank you very much. I didn't say that right. Is it McPherson? Other questions? Petition. You have a microphone.
So, given that the first building, 207, I think is going to be focused on older adults, and the bridge housing, temporary bridge housing that's going to be built, is the focus going to be on bringing in people that are older adult, veterans that are older adults into the temporary shelter so that they can transition into the bridge?
The intent of the temporary bridge housing is to provide veterans, whoever they may be in the cohort, who have a housing plan but have not yet had permanent supportive housing for them identified, a place to be while they're engaging in VA services. The nature, that short-term interim housing, it doesn't actually make sense to identify a particular sub-cohort other than homeless veterans, men in one structure, women in the other. So I don't think that it is logical, frankly, to prioritize a sub-cohort because they're going to be there shortly on their way to something else. I did want to say, Heidi never did get a chance to speak to this, but we're viewing the temporary bridge housing as it's clearly temporary and a bridge for the individuals going through it, but it's also a temporary bridge solution for us here on the GLA campus as the permanent housing is being built out. And although I think it makes really good sense from a community planning perspective to identify which part of the campus is going to be housing for families versus housing for seniors, I don't think it makes as much sense to do that within these temporary bridge housing structures, which are a short-term solution for people on their way to something else, if that makes sense.
Can I just add one thought to that, which is what we've done in Long Beach is create a continuum of housing ranging from shelter to transitional to permanent supportive housing. We think a similar opportunity exists here, whether we're talking about bridge shelter, the bridge housing, the New Directions program, the DOM. How do we work with the VA and its partners, right, to create a seamless continuum across the entirety of the North Campus here at West LA? There's a tremendous opportunity to do that, and that would allow individual veterans or veterans and families to retain their connections to their case managers, retain their connections to their friends and colleagues, and those connections are really, really important in terms of recovery, as I think we all know and understand.
I was going to comment on something else, but just on that very matter, I would say that as long as that's supplemental to 1,200 units of permanent supportive housing for homeless people, it sounds like a worthy thought, but it needs to be supplemental to, not inclusive of the units. So when we're counting units, that would be an important part of our
Right,
concern.
the 1,200 are the permanent supportive homes,
That's right.
and I don't think what we're talking about is creating more transitional housing programs or more shelter programs, but tapping into those existing programs that
Sure.
exist.
Sure. As long as when we're doing the addition, the only thing that's in the 1,200 column are permanent supportive housing. So the one thing I wanted to ask, I thought one of you mentioned an MOU between the three entities. Is that true? Is it possible for you to share that MOU so that we understand? I assume it's for accountability among the three entities, but it would be helpful to us to understand that accountability function so we know how to hold you all accountable for your roles. So is that possible to see, to have?
I would want to confer with our council and our colleagues at the VA. We're currently working on an MOU with the VA that memorializes our relationship in this interim period. So if I can maybe table that for a later point, but I think we've heard your request.
Two quick, Jeff Shearer for the record, two quick questions. The first would be, and this is more for probably our chair and probably a discussion for the future, and Megan as well, but given that there's a lot of overlap in your mission, especially around outreach and communication, how will we work together in the future? What does that cadence look like? Or is it just through the IPT, and Megan will keep us up to date, just not clarity on our end? And then secondly is, and we've discussed this as a board in the past, potentially ramping up the number of houses on the campus away from 1,200 and being fixed at that number, and looking at concepts that go, much higher than that. Have you guys been thinking about that already and exploring that and how the cost structure will increase in line with housing ramping up beyond 1,200 units per supportive housing?
So from the, Brian DeAndre here, from the RFQ, we understand the charge to be a minimum of 1,200 units. There is presently an environmental document that is out for public comment that contemplates a certain amount of housing and people. And so, we're working within the envelope of what is being studied in connection with the environmental process.
And I think we are not envisioning this as the only answer for homeless veterans in Los Angeles. There's a lot of other housing being built out there. So I think we'll evaluate that as years go on, and hopefully we'll begin to drive down that population, and other affordable housing will be built in the community, so they'll have an option as to where to live.
Megan Plans, just wanted to add a clarifying comment. I think it would be helpful for this board to have a full presentation on kind of the map. Where did the 1,200 come from in the draft master plan? What are the factors that are appropriate to look at as we refine that number based on the need and the demand, and also any additional available housing that's out in the community? What are the limitations on the number that are built into the current PEIS? How does that evolve over time? There's a lot of stuff to unpack there, and I think it would be more satisfying to everybody on this board if we had kind of a rundown on what does the map look like.
Jeff Shearer, just a follow-up. My point would come from, I believe it was Ted Liu's representative in the comments that she had given us a previous speaking in open public comment here about the willingness and openness to ramp up beyond 1,200 units, and also exploring things beyond just homelessness housing on the campus potentially in the future as well. So lots of different concepts and how to use this space.
I'm sorry, is that another question? Yes.
Just looking at the RFQ, is there anything specific that we can help you with as we approach the next milestone, which appears to be the neighborhood planning and summary presentation?
Brian DeAndre here. In terms of how the board might support us as it relates to the present process we're in, I think to the extent you have thoughts on what could be resources, organizations we should talk to, people we should listen to, please send them our way. We're in listening mode right now. I don't have any specific or particular asks of the board at this juncture, but it's good to see how engaged you all are and how ready and willing you are to assist. I think hopefully in the coming months, maybe we'll be in a better position to talk to you about some of our specific needs and think about ways you may be able to assist.
I guess maybe a different way of asking it is, how would we actually be able to look more closely at the the deliverables that you, per the RFQ, will present, I believe in February and then into April?
Yeah, I think for that question, I would want to defer to either Megan or Paul. I think the question is, how does the board look at or engage with this initial kind of assessment and planning process that we find ourselves in?
So I'm happy to have Paul step in if what I'm about to say is wrong. I think we're in an uncharted place here. It's the first time VA has engaged a principal developer on a project of this scale. First time we've had a federal advisory committee to help us work it out. So I don't know that anybody in this room has an answer. What's the best way to ensure that the perspectives around this table get built into the process going forward? But I think it's incumbent on all of us to think it through and to hear from you all this week and in the future about how you'd like to help.
Paul.
Sorry, Paul McPherson for the record. To answer your question, we've tasked the principal developer with informing the PEIS, and as Brian DeAndrea said, there's been a lot of information downloaded to the principal developer so far, and we continue to download information at an amazing rate, and they're taking it all in because we're under a tight timeline to complete that informative process to the PEIS. So right now it's just broad concepts, broad ideas that they're dealing with, and as we go forward, we're in the bi-weekly update to the VCOEB, and we try to give a brief update during those calls as to what the principal developer is working on and the kind of themes that they're thinking of. And I think as we go forward, you'll find that process will become more informative. But right now, it's sort of a one-direction mode. We're giving an awful lot of information to the developer team, and they're having to distill that and trying to figure out which way to go and how to inform that PEIS process. So as we get closer towards the middle of the year and the completion of the PEIS and the publication of the ROD, there'll be a lot more clarity as to how North Campus might look at what the concepts are that the principal developer is following through on.
Does that answer your question?
I guess the question is, what is deliverable for the RFQ? There was a timeline slide that I'm just curious about.
The RFQ didn't actually have specific deliverables, but there was a concept that we asked the developer to do, and the first being obviously, come forward, respond, be selected, inform the PEIS, and move forward with Building 207. So there's two processes that are going on that the developer is pursuing right now. One is the no kidding, we need 207 done as quickly as we can, and the developer has set up a team to do exactly that, led by Thomas SAFRAN and Associates. The second deliverable is informing the PEIS, and that is an ongoing process that's not complete at this point in time, but it will become complete towards the middle of the year. Is that a little closer to answering your question?
I can get offline.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Last question. Yes, Don, I'm sorry.
I'm going to be a bit of an interpreter here, if I may, and maybe I'm wrong, so disagree with me fully. I believe, coming from a developer's point of view, what the committee is interested in is not necessarily your response to an EIR, but rather when you have a site plan, seeing it and having some input into it. For example, they had a question about a playground. I would say to you, there's a higher incidence of autism and sensory integration problems. Could it be a sensory integration playground? So we might want to see the site plan. Then when you have the initial conceptual building plans, the committee would probably want to see them, the elevations in the conceptual building plans, in case they had any input into it. I'm thinking that's the level. I don't believe that, and this is my opinion, excuse me for disagreeing, that seeing your inner workings of your financial relationships amongst each other is our business. But I do think that the site plan and the elevations and who you're putting in the buildings could be mutually beneficial to us, so that we could help you make recommendations like, could the VA help with some off-site repairs to the streets, etc. Is that sort of what we're all getting at?
Yes.
Well,
Is that what you're getting at? Here you go.
Absolutely, this is Paul McPherson. Absolutely, when the ideas are more on paper and we have something to share, we'll be more than happy for the principal developer to do that.
Jeff?
We welcome all the input, as Brian has said.
And I don't think what the first plan we come up with is written in stone. So it will not be it will not be written in stone before we show it to you. So there will be input.
yeah, let me just wrap this session up with a couple of comments. First of all, your selection, questions about that, our questions about that, took up the better part of our first year as a faculty. So we eagerly anticipated your selection. We're gratified by what took place and the results, and we certainly appreciate your presentation here today. We understand that you're starting down the path of this journey as well, and from what you've shown us today, your vision of where we're going seems spot on. One of the questions that we had with regard to the RFQ was, as somebody said already, I think, whether we would simply get a digger or would we get somebody that had a concept of what this rededication of this 300 plus acres would look like in support of our veterans. And it certainly seems that you're thinking along those lines. As we go forward and look at how we interact, for us on the committee, it's important to remember the briefing we got this morning. We don't task others. What we do is put together recommendations for the secretary. Information will come to us in various ways, perhaps in direct briefings like this from the principal developer, or perhaps, and most often, in the bi-weekly updates that we have from the IPT. Those are the places where we're informed of what's coming, and perhaps even what's anticipated as obstacles that we can form a recommendation to help move this process forward. So we look forward to sharing this journey with you. We look forward to this transformation. We look forward, most of all, to building a place for our precious veterans. So thanks very much for your time and presentation.